Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own It Powercast, the place to come to get what you need to move yourself forward. Hey, it's Mary Baker and welcome to episode 194, Taking Responsibility, the Key to Building Confidence. Well, welcome to a brand new month, which is going to be all about one of my favorite topics, and I think one of the biggest keys to self-confidence, and that is personal responsibility. By being honest with ourselves and others about what we need and want, we can create more positive and I think fulfilling relationships that are based on mutual understanding and trust. I think we also set the tone for how we expect to be treated, which can lead to healthier and more satisfying interactions with others over time. Okay, so taking responsibility is a very broad statement, isn't it? So here are a few examples of how personal responsibility relates to self-confidence, in my mind. First, taking responsibility for your own happiness. Instead of relying on external factors or other people to make you happy, you start taking ownership of your own emotional well-being. Now, next week, we're going to get into how owning your feelings and taking responsibility for honoring them in healthy ways and not leaking them out on others is going to be a big part of our focus. Another example of how personal responsibility connects to self-confidence is because you're holding yourself accountable. This means being honest with yourself about your actions and their impact on other people. It also means taking responsibility for any mistakes or missteps you make, lessons that you're learning, rather than making excuses, rationalizing it, or blaming other people. You're doing that because of them, Number 3, setting and pursuing goals. When you take responsibility for your own happiness and your own success, and you set goals for yourself, I think you build confidence in your ability to achieve what you set out to do. Now we're going to talk about owning your choices and how this is crucial if you want to feel empowered and free in life. So we're going to get into that this month. Number 4, maintaining healthy boundaries. Taking responsibility for your own needs and boundaries means setting clear expectations for yourself and other people, and then not making people read your mind. So that means communicating them in a respectful and assertive, confident, grounded, peaceful manner. 5, learning from failures and setbacks. Taking personal responsibility for your lessons. I think it allows you to learn and grow from them and mature rather than becoming discouraged or giving up. And that can feel more hopeful if we know that we can take the lesson out of the mess and make something good from it. I think it helps us to move forward. And finally, prioritizing your self-care. When you take responsibility for your own well-being, you make self-care a priority. This can include taking time for yourself, getting things done, getting rest, getting planning time, all the things we talked about last month. Now, I'm not going to talk about owning your stuff without also getting into boundaries because you can't have one without the other. Taking responsibility and boundaries, I think, are so closely connected because setting and enforcing boundaries is an essential part of taking personal responsibility for our own well-being. Because boundaries help us create limits and guidelines for how we allow others to treat us and interact with us, and hopefully how we want to treat them. In fact, my experience has taught me that when you grow up in a family that has blurred boundaries and lots of passive-aggressive behavior, especially the unearned guilt, you can't face the reality of the issues and therefore can't problem solve because the family didn't. And then it's really hard then to take ownership of yourself because when you did do that, when you did speak up, or maybe your mother did, bad things happened. Or almost worse, maybe nothing got better. Nothing happened, right? So then you lost faith in the idea that I can speak up, we can negotiate needs, we can problem solve and get things done. So a lot of people then become very passive and say, well, screw it, I'm just not going to say anything or do anything because it doesn't matter. I think when we take responsibility for ourselves, we recognize that we are the ones who are ultimately in control of our lives and experiences. This includes setting and enforcing boundaries to make sure we're treated with respect and dignity in our relationships. For example, if someone repeatedly crosses our boundary by speaking to us in a disrespectful or demeaning way, it's our responsibility, I think, to address the issue and communicate our boundaries. This might mean speaking up and letting that person know their behavior is not acceptable and that we do expect to be treated with respect. If that behavior continues, we might need to take further actions, such as limiting or ending contact with the person. I think by taking responsibility for our boundaries and not putting them on other people, not waiting for them to get it together, I think we protect ourselves from mistreatment, but we also set a clear expectation for them and for us about how we expect to be treated in our relationships. That's a direct correlation to our self-worth. And a lot of times we can forget that. We also forget that by doing this, we can end up having healthier, more meaningful, better, more vulnerable connections with others. Here's the thing, though. It's not always going to be easy or comfortable. Of course not. And it might require us to confront difficult situations or have uncomfortable conversations with other people. However, by taking personal responsibility for our own well-being and setting boundaries, we can have greater self-confidence and self-respect and more respect from other people, ironically. So here's like a little mini case study to illustrate what I'm talking about. Here's Samantha. Samantha's been feeling really overwhelmed and stressed out at work because her boss has been assigning her more tasks than she can handle. And she really felt like she was drowning. She found herself staying late at the office every day, skipping lunch, working on weekends just to catch up. Samantha realized that she needed to set some boundaries with her boss to avoid burnout and maintain her mental health. She decided then to have a conversation with her boss to talk about her workload and how it was impacting her. During the conversation, Samantha took personal responsibility for her own well-being by stating her needs calmly and clearly. She explained how the workload was affecting her and offered some solutions, such as delegating some of the tasks or maybe adjusting deadlines. She also made it clear that she was not willing to sacrifice her health and well-being for the sake of her job. As a result of the conversation, Samantha's boss was able to see things from her perspective and then agreed to make some changes to her workload. Samantha felt a great sense of relief and empowerment, knowing that she had taken responsibility for her own well-being and that setting boundaries would help her maintain a healthy work-life balance. Now, this case study highlights how when we take personal responsibility and we set boundaries, this can lead to positive outcomes in both our personal and professional relationships. When we communicate our needs clearly and respectfully and not act out, I think it lets the other person know that we value ourselves and we take responsibility for ourselves, and we're in a place of choice, and so are they. Now, of course, it doesn't always mean that when you do set limits, that the person on the other end of those limits is going to be healthy enough to, one, not only accept them, but two, to agree that they're actually healthy and therefore want to respect them. But here's where it comes back to personal responsibility, though, meaning that you also then must own the fact that you might need to make some changes on your end to find peace or to be respected or et cetera, because maybe they don't want to change. So remember detachment. Just because you have healthy expectations of how you want to be treated doesn't mean the other person is in a space where they even want to honor that. The unhealthier they are, the more likely that's going to be. So there's a few things that we might have to consider, like lowering our expectations, getting needs met elsewhere. Maybe setting protective boundaries until you can figure it out. Meaning if the boundary is with, let's say, your partner and they're blowing a lot of money, maybe you take your portion out of the account until they can get it together. Maybe you limit your exposure to this relationship. Maybe you don't call your mom every day if she's criticizing you every time you talk to her. Maybe you limit it. Or finally, maybe you have to leave the relationship. In the earlier case study, maybe Samantha realizes that after trying to set limits in a healthy way, that her boss is too toxic. And then she's going to have to own the fact that she's responsible for her mental health and maybe find another job. Taking responsibility broken down. So what it means is, number one, facing reality. Yeah, the whole reality, not just the parts we want to see, not just things in a vacuum, the whole reality, all the variables that we can think of, all of the impacts going forward. Number two, owning your part, which we're really going to dive into this month around your feelings and your choices and your behaviors. Trying your best not to be a hostage to whatever's going on for the other person du jour. Whatever they're willing to do, whatever they're not doing, whatever they're doing, which is problematic. Three, and this is a big one. So after you experience something, then going forward, being proactive. Like, we need to stop being surprised when the same shit keeps happening to us. We are choosing these people in these situations. Maybe we're tolerating things. Maybe we assume they'll do the right thing so that we don't have to set boundaries or risk conflict or have a trauma response around being yelled at. Or, God forbid, find out the truth about them that we don't want to see. Being proactive, being in reality, planning and accepting, doing our part. And number four, taking responsibility, I think, really means identity, which means owning all the pieces of who we are. So that our insides match our outsides, and then we can stop hiding what we truly think, feel, and need. We've talked about this before. Then we feel grounded, less anxious, with a lot less self-doubt because we make sense. We know who we are. We know what we stand for. We know what we're willing to do, not willing to do. We know who we want to be and how we want to be. So those are some aspects of taking responsibility. Now, let's talk about when we don't. Because on the other hand, when we don't take personal responsibility and fail to set healthy boundaries, you know what's going to happen. We're going to become resentful and unhappy, which I think can damage our self-confidence and our relationships. We may feel like victims of circumstance or powerless to change our situations, which you know what happens then. That's going to lead to a sense of helplessness and low self-esteem. It's a vicious cycle. Conversely, when we take responsibility and set healthy boundaries, we empower ourselves, I think, to make positive changes and to create relationships that we want to have. So here are some examples of behaviors that might indicate a lack of taking responsibility for our feelings and behaviors. Here are some examples of behaviors that might indicate a lack of taking responsibility for ourselves. First one, blaming others for our emotions, our reactions, and our choices. Now, on the face of it, you might say, well, that's really obvious, Mary. I'm like, okay, yeah, the big blatant stuff we can get. What about the subtle stuff? What about when we blur boundaries? Like, well, I wouldn't have done that if she hadn't done this. Well, that was your choice. Or focusing on how upset and pissed we are about what happened, and yet never getting to the point of, okay, what was my part? How did I get myself into this mess? How did I allow this? And that goes into number two, making excuses for our behavior instead of owning up to it. That comes from childhood. When you get defensive and you're afraid to admit the truth, it's because you're afraid you're going to be guilted or shamed or blamed or hurt or whatever. So if you struggle with that, you came by it honestly, and it is something to really work on. Find some safe people you can tell the truth to, and they don't shame you around it. Another behavior is we avoid responsibility by denying our role in a situation, especially when our people-pleasing or manipulating or avoiding or lashing out happened. Because you can make excuses and say, well, I was just trying to be helpful, or I was just trying to be a nice person. Number 4, deflecting criticism and not taking feedback constructively, assuming that is healthy feedback. Someone isn't just trying to shame you, they're trying to tell you that what you did hurt their feelings and they need behavior change or they need to negotiate something different with you. Maybe the criticism is warranted. Maybe we have a blind spot to maybe one of our behaviors or how we communicate or choices that we're making. Number 5, becoming defensive or confrontational when challenged. When we don't want to own our truth, whatever that is, good, bad, ugly, or indifferent, God forbid we should be found out, meaning someone's going to mention it, they're going to call you out on it. And the big fear is that we're rejected as a person, and that's not true. And that's why a lot of the work here is a lot of self-love and self-acceptance, so you can look at your shit and own it, but you're still a good person. And 6, engaging in self-destructive behaviors or coping mechanisms rather than addressing the root cause of our emotions. So numbing out, running away, medicating it, pretending it's not there, pretending we're fine is not a way to self-confidence. In fact, we move further and further away the more that we disown about ourselves. Now, I can take each of these statements, obviously, and talk so much about them, but I want you, as you listen this month, to compare and contrast in your mind what is healthy versus what isn't as you go through your day and encounter situations. I want you to take a look at what is taking responsibility versus what is denying it or putting on others in this particular circumstance. Doing the detachment phrase can really help here. That's about them. What's about me? That's about them, but what is about me? What do I need to own? So this month, we're going to get into owning your thoughts, owning your feelings, owning your choices, and owning your behavior. And even though for some of you it may seem terrifying, know that it won't be. Know that, ironically, the more you own, the better you're going to feel. The more you own, the more confident you will become, the less power you will feel that life and situations and people have over you. You're actually going to feel a lot more freedom. So today we started the month with such an important topic, personal responsibility, and why it's everything if we want to have confidence, if we want to feel happy, and take charge of our life in a healthy way. This month we're going to talk about how to own our feelings, how to set boundaries, how to own our choices and our behaviors. We talked today about what it looks like when we don't, when we blame and we outsource the ownership and we don't absorb the healthy criticism that might help us grow. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope you heard some things that you can take with you and you can start working on. Or maybe you were able to reflect on the work that you're already doing. And if you are, good for you. This is such powerful work that has a huge payoff in your life. If you don't already get the newsletter, make sure you sign up at ownitpowercast.com. Pass this episode along to others that you think might benefit from it. All right, so pay it forward, keep focusing on you, and I'll see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you can begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.